This week at the box office, Shazam electrifies audiences to a $53.5 million opening weekend and the number one spot. Elsewhere in the countdown, Pet Sematary proves that dead isn't always better, as it is reanimated for a $25 million opening weekend. All this and more on this episode of The Weekend Take.
You're listening to The Weekend Take, and now your host, Sean Schaefer.
Hello everyone and welcome to The Weekend Take. I'm your host, Sean Schaefer, and with me this week is director and producer Dan Van Treska. Dan, how are you doing?
I'm good, Sean. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
For those of you new to the show, The Weekend Take is a weekly podcast that breaks down the weekend box office results, but looks beyond the numbers at the current trends and topics of the film industry. We'll get started the way we do every week by looking at the films that left the top 10. This week, there were 3 films that left the top 10, the first of which was The Beach Bum from Neon, dropping from the number 10 position down to number 14. The film took in $494,000, a 72% drop from last week, losing 45 screens to bring its count down to 1,055 screens. A $468 per screen average brings its cume up to $3 million in its second week of release. The next film to leave the top 10 this week was Tyler Perry's A Madea Family Funeral, which dropped from the number 9 position down to number 12. The film from Lionsgate took in $1.1 million, a 55.7% drop from last week. It lost nearly half of its screens, losing 822 screens to bring its count down to 1,101. It had a per-screen average of just over $1,000 and brings its cume up to $72.1 million in its 6th week of release. And lastly, to leave the top 10 was Hotel Mumbai from Bleecker Street, which dropped from the number 8 position down to number 11. Hotel Mumbai takes in $1.7 million, a 45% drop from last week. It managed to pick up a few screens, gaining 6 screens to bring its count up to 930, and a near $1,900 per screen average brings its cume up to $6.4 million in its 3rd week of release. So Dan, looking at these 3 films that left the top 10, are you surprised to see any of them leaving as quickly as they did, or maybe hanging around as long as they have?
Not really. Tyler Perry's got a huge following. He's a brand. He does what he does, and he does it very well. So I'm not surprised that that was kind of hanging around for quite a while. You know, with Shazam, Pet Sematary coming in, obviously you knew that those kind of probably smaller films were going to get bumped out.
As I predicted last week when looking at The Beach Bums opening, it didn't start off well, and I knew it wasn't going to end well. And that was definitely evidenced by the 72% drop from weekend to weekend and a very paltry $468 per screen average. So
Yeah.
Unfortunately for Matthew McConaughey in 2019, he's 0 for 2, as earlier this year he was in Serenity with Anne Hathaway, which also bombed miserably.
Yeah.
And I think for Hotel Mumbai, I don't think it's so much a lack of interest. I think it's just, it had a high per screen average, had nearly $1,900 per screen average, but wasn't on enough screens to really get its way back into the top 10. I mean, 930 screens, that's the smallest current screen count of anything that's in the top 10 or even just outside of it. So I think it's just a combination of low screen count, times high per screen average still just doesn't make out enough money.
Yeah, for sure. That's a very low number of screens. It's a smaller picture, even though it's kind of a tight drama kind of thriller, and it looks very good. I've heard good things, but it just can't compete when you're looking at Shazam as an example. 4,000 screens, Pet Sematary Pet Sematary, I should say, 3,500 screens. I'll go even one step further. Look at Us and Captain Marvel, still both 3,500 screens roughly. So that's just massive.
Yeah, your top 5 films account for probably about 40% of the available screens in the country. So
yeah,
doesn't leave much real estate for anything else to try and make its way in.
No, unfortunately not.
And then, yes, for Madea Family Funeral, Tyler Perry certainly has a great brand in Madea. Now, this is the swan song of the character. It's supposed to be the last time he dons the fat suit and wig. Do you believe that this really will be the last time Tyler Perry transforms into Madea for the screen?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, he's a busy guy, but I have a feeling he may go for another one.
Maybe not as her as like the leading character, but I think she'll show up in some property of his down the road.
For sure.
But for Tyler Perry, I hope he creatively satisfied with his character, he can start doing, other creative endeavors or doing more acting on his own. People forget that he has acting chops outside of comedy.
He's very good.
He was in Gone Girl, and then more recently, he plays Colin Powell in Vice with Christian Bale, and he was great in that. Yep. So it'd be nice to see him branch out and do some more of that.
Yeah, I'd love to see him do some more acting. He's really good.
Number 10.
Starting off the countdown at number 10, down from number 7 this week, is How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World from Universal, which took in just under $2 million, a 55% drop from last week. The film lost 857 screens to bring its count down to 1,928, has a per-screen average of just over $1,000, and brings its cume up to $156.7 million in its 7th week of release on a $129 million budget. So for How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, much like Medea, which we were just talking about, this is the concluding chapter in this particular franchise. How to Train Your Dragon, a trilogy and a spin-off series on Netflix, whereas Medea was 9 films. It goes off on a good note. Last week we reported how it crossed the $500 million mark worldwide, which surpassed the original film's worldwide gross. Still a country mile away from the second film's worldwide gross, but a profitable vehicle for Universal nonetheless. So looking at this film, Dan, are you familiar with the franchise?
Yeah.
Are you a fan of the How to Train Your Dragon franchise? Are you familiar with the Netflix show?
Not the Netflix show, but I do love the movies. I think they're really, they're just great films. Big fan.
I've seen all 3. Obviously, I kind of predetermined by the fact of having an 8-year-old is that I have to partake in all of these films. I honestly, as an audience goer, I enjoyed all of them. There's a lot of heart in their stories, and there's, good character development, and just from a visual aspect, I mean, they put so much detail and thought into the visuals of everything.
Yeah.
Right down to the finish of, the scales on each of the dragons. This is certainly a labor of love for the studio, and it's something that's important to them, which is also probably why the films were about 4 to 5 years apart from one another.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they take that long just to begin. I mean, obviously it's animation. They take forever.
That's true, which makes me wonder how sometimes some of these studios just crank out films so quickly. I mean, going off something else, another Universal release that's coming out later this year, you've got The Secret Life of Pets 2 coming out. Now, it's only been 2 years since the last one. So is it an attention to detail that prolongs release windows of How to Train Your Dragon? Or is it, on the other side of it, is Universal just trying to keep striking while the iron's hot with things like Secret Life of Pets and like the Minions franchise? Do they think that they could survive if they put 4 or 5 years between those?
That's a good question. When I was kind of out there in the mix of it, they were really only doing 4 a year, if I remember correctly. So I think going into it, they've got multiple projects at various stages of development. I think they probably know before it opens what it's going to do. And I think that they've already laid the foundation. So if it does become successful, they can just jump right into the sequel. I think that they plan for it. Nowadays, having a one-off animated film it's not even conceivable. There's going to be a sequel if it's successful. So I think they go into it knowing that if it's a hit, we're jumping right into the sequel.
How to Train Your Dragon, each film had a different distributor. The first one was released by Paramount, the second by Fox, this one by Universal. And so I wonder if part of the reasoning for the kind of changing of guards with distributors was because they're like, look, we're not going to turn it out in 2 years. We're going to take 4 years. We're going to take 5 years.
Well, part of that too was DreamWorks' distribution deal for forever was at Universal. Then it changed to Paramount, and then it went to Fox. So that's why you're seeing those different distributors taking it over. For a while, they were jumping around from different studios to distribute. That has something to do with it, definitely. But I also think it probably has something to do with just like Titanic at the time, or any of these monster films. They need a second partner to handle the risk. It's just too much money.
For How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, I imagine with 2 family-oriented films being in the 4 releases next week, I think this will be the end of the run in the top 10 for How to Train Your Dragon. But
yeah, I'd agree.
Certainly a successful run. I mean, over $500 million. It costs the least of any of the 3 films in the franchise to make this time around. Universal's pocketing that profit, and we'll see where their creative forces go from here.
Yeah, agreed.
Number 9.
So moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 9. Down from number 6 is Wonder Park from Paramount, which took in just over $2 million, a near 60% drop from last week. The film lost about a third of its screens, losing 1,023 screens to bring its count down to 2,281, an $894 per screen average as it brings its cume up to $41.9 million in its 4th week of release on a reported $80 to $100 million budget. As we just wrapped up talking about How to Train Your Dragon, you mentioned how there can no longer be these standalone animated films. You have to plan for a sequel provided it's successful. Well, here's Wonder Park, a standalone animated feature that isn't successful. So what does Paramount do?
Right. Well, and it's interesting because this actually sounds like a fun film. I kind of want to see it. I think it's a good idea. It's got a good cast. Yeah, I think with something like this, they try to just recoup their money and then just kind of forget about it. Now, I'm sure there's other ways that they're going to try to get their money back on it, whether they're going to extend the run. I'm not sure. Maybe when they release it to stream, instead of releasing it to buy and then 2, 3 weeks later to rent, I think they may just unload it, rent, and buy at the same time, which would make sense because then at least they can get money coming back.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of been one of the quandaries that I've had, over the last few weeks with Wonder Park. Is you're right, the story does look to be good and entertaining. I think it's a combination of just the release window, the market saturation of other family-oriented films that are more established. I mean, Wonder Park was going up against How to Train Your Dragon, which is an established franchise. It went up against Lego Movie, an established franchise. It's going up against Dumbo, which has nostalgia and established franchise factor in it, and that it's part of Disney and its primary animated features. So I think it just had a lot to go against that wasn't going to work in its favor. I think one of the other things is that I think it also was trying too hard to be a Pixar film because, it has this very entertaining and joyous and exciting kind of story and full of imagination and visuals with this like super like somber undertone.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that Wonder Park as it stands, June has fabricated in her mind and now seems to be physically built in front of her, seems to be just a giant metaphor of her trying to cope with her mother's failing health and an illness who helped her create the world in her mind. And it just seems to be a very Pixar-like nature to the story, which if you're not Pixar, you're not going to do it as good as Pixar.
Right. Pixar, yeah, they're in a realm of their own. With any story, that's just such a fine line to walk. It's very tough to hit that out of the park. Especially like you were saying, kind of going through the story. I mean, just like any fairy tale, it's there to teach you about the real world and real emotions, but in a fun, safe way. And again, that's not as easy as it sounds.
No, it's not, because it's a very fine line to walk between teaching them these lessons and just making a bunch of kids cry in a theater. You certainly don't want the latter.
No. No, but you brought up a good point in that look at what it had going against. Everything was already out there. It was all brand recognition. I hate even saying that because it sounds so clinical, but you know what I mean. There was huge movies that had a following already there.
Yeah.
That's a hard feat to achieve, to get a good opening against those movies.
I mean, and that's partially what we're going to discuss when we get to our opinion segment later on, is how this kind of brand recognition in the cinema works against, the little guy trying to make their own way, to carve their own path, like Wonder Park.
Mm-hmm.
When you have brand recognition of established franchises like How to Train Your Dragon and Lego, as a movie-going audience and as studio systems go, we have this seeming need of continuation of story and universe and, sequels, and to just drag every story out to the nth degree. And if your plan isn't to do that, it makes it really hard to be just a standalone film. You kind of get lost in the mix.
Yeah.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 8.
So moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 8. Down from number 4 this week is Unplanned from PureFlix, taking in $3.2 million, a 50% drop from last week. The film picked up some screens, adding 457 screens to bring its count up to 1,516. Averaging just over $2,100 per screen, it brings its cume up to $12.4 million here in its second week of release on a $6 million budget. So for Unplanned, this is another small film from a small studio like Hotel Mumbai and Beach Bum, which also came out last week along with Unplanned. Well, Hotel Mumbai was in its first week of expansion last week, but these are these small films from these small studios hoping to do big business. They're the ones that are trying to be the exception to what I just said about how it's really hard for a standalone film to make its own way at the box office. But for Unplanned, it seems to be doing it. Now, whether that's because of it being a good film, a good story, or because it tackles kind of a hot button topic right now in the idea of Planned Parenthood and pro-choice versus pro-life. Either way, this film is doing very well. $12.4 million already in second week of release. And for PureFlix, I mean, those are some good numbers for them. I mean, looking at them, out of 17 films PureFlix has released, Unplanned already sits at number 6. And it's only a couple 100,000 behind the number 5 and number 4 films that they've put out. So this is a successful film for them. It's climbing up their ranks, and depending on where it goes from here, if it expands further yet again next week or sits tight in these theaters, who knows. But Dan, what are your thoughts on Unplanned? Are you familiar with the film? Have you had a chance to see any material on it?
I've heard about this and I've read some stuff about it. I've not seen it yet. Like you said, it's definitely a hot button issue. I have a feeling, I mean, it's already basically doubled its budget. So I have a feeling this is going to keep rising. I think there's a lot of conversations going on in the social media kind of stratosphere about the film. I'm definitely going to watch it, but I think it's one of those films that's going to hang around for a while.
The other thing to think about when discussing Unplanned is not only is it a film that tackles this sensitive subject matter, but it is also based on a true story. It's based on the story of Abby Johnson, who was one of the youngest directors at Planned Parenthood. To hear her story, to see that this is based in fact, certainly adds another layer to the intrigue of an audience to check out the film.
No doubt. That is a lot of the draw for me. It's a real story based on a real person, real events. So I think that's really what's driving it. If it was more of a straight fiction, I don't think it would be doing as well. From what I've seen, it looks like a very well made, very well told story. But I think adding the component that it is based on a real person and a real story, that's just fuel to the fire. So
that's the other thing, is that if it were based in fiction, if this were the work of a screenwriter, as a screenwriter they may slant it in a way to be biased towards one stance or the other. But when you say, no, this is what happened, this is a real person, I think that lets someone come in to watch the movie and be more objective to it. You're not going into it saying it's a heavily, right-wing favored view of the film or heavily left-wing favored view of the film, but to know that it's based in fact, you can kind of look at it more objectively. You don't have to go into it knowing that there's possibly some kind of skewed bias towards one viewpoint or the other. Right now in the box office, that there's a few of these offerings. Later in the countdown, we have Best of Enemies from STX Entertainment, also based on a true story. We already talked about Hotel Mumbai, also based on a true story. Sometimes there are a lot of stories that happen in life that are more intriguing and more entertaining than fiction.
Definitely. Oh, no doubt. Truth is stranger than fiction sometimes.
So for Unplanned, looking at where it goes from here, I think it'll try to hang in there, probably land around the 9 or 10 position, depending on how everything plays out next week. For some of these smaller distributors telling these smaller, more intimate stories, I think it's more about getting the story told to as many audience members as they can, and maybe not always necessarily worrying about the bottom line and profit.
Number 7.
Moving on in the countdown now, we're up to number 7. Down from number 5 this week is 5 Feet Apart from Lionsgate, which took in $3.7 million, a 40% drop from last week. The film lost 361 screens to bring its count down to 2,484. It averaged just under $1,500 per screen, as it brings its cume up to $41.6 million in its 4th week of release on a $7 million budget. So for 5 Feet Apart from Lionsgate, this 40.3% drop has actually been the biggest drop it's taken in the 4 weeks that it's come out, and the first time it drops out of the top 5. This film has really kind of struck a chord with audiences and found a home in the countdown. What seemingly is just another genre film about star-crossed lovers that can't be for one reason or another, in this case being the fact that they've come across one another in a hospital and they both have life-threatening illnesses. This film gives an opportunity to Cole Sprouse and Haley Lee Richardson. Here's an opportunity for them to play romantic leads and be in the spotlight for once. So Dan, are you familiar with the film or the kind of young adult novel that it's based on?
Not the novel. I know that. I mean, the film, of course. Yeah, I thought it was. I didn't think the film broke any barriers or any different kind of, I guess, creative ground here, and that's not a bad thing because I think it was the kind of simplistic and I dare I say not formulaic, but the narrative was very straightforward, but it almost needed to be based on the subject matter. I thought it was a nice little film. It was a nice little picture, and I thought the actors were fantastic. It's kind of like the YA trend, Fault in Our Stars, which was also very similar, also a great movie, but they're kind of the same ilk. You know what you're getting. You know what you're going to get, and I think it definitely delivers.
The benefit it has is that there's nothing else currently offering what it is offering in the box office. So they're the benefactor of being kind of the only game in town to give you that kind of that YA, young adult drama, like you said, The Fault in Our Stars, or anything Nicholas Sparks has done. I was just waiting for the poster to be like two people almost kissing. Almost.
I know.
Like this far apart. And on a $7 million budget, I mean, Lionsgate's got to be really happy. You didn't want to say formulaic, but it is what it is. I mean, the reason why we say things are formulaic is because the studio system has formulas in place. Like they know, if I make this film for this budget, I can expect this return. Every once in a while, something really takes off that is completely unexpected. And I think this is one of those films for Lionsgate. I don't think they expected this amount of attention at the box office.
No, I would agree. I mean, Lionsgate makes these movies very well. This is what they do. Yeah, I think you're right. They kind of, they kind of work with the same people. They have the kind of templates they want. It's working for them. Like I said, I thought it was a good movie. I saw it. I was like, okay, yeah, it delivered. It stirred the emotions and it achieved what it set out to achieve. So, I mean, I think it's good because if you can make these kind of lower budgeted films and they do well, that's good for everybody.
I mean, and certainly good for the two leads in the film.
Oh, for sure.
Previous to this, we have Cole Sprouse, who, as I mentioned, is Jughead on CW's Riverdale. In a much younger self, he was, a Disney Channel kid, with his twin brother on, Sweet Life of Zach and Cody and Sweet Life on Deck. So, this is his first real, foray into the big screen.
Yeah.
So if he was terrible at it, I don't think that the film would have done nearly as well. And for Haley Lou Richardson, this is kind of her, stepping into the spotlight herself. Previously, she had been in Edge of 17 and Split, but not as a lead.
Right.
Here these two young actors are in leads now, proving that they can pull in some box office with their performance. So
yeah,
maybe it gives them an opportunity down the road to do it again.
For sure. I think definitely. I think we'll be seeing a lot more of those two now.
Number 6.
Moving on the countdown now, we're up to number 6, and it's our first new release of the week. It's The Best of Enemies from STX Entertainment, which took in $4.5 million on just over 1,700 screens. A $2,600 per screen average, as it brings its cume up to $4.5 million, as I mentioned, here in its first week of release on a $10 million budget. So The Best of Enemies, here is another one of these films based in truth, based on a true story. This one starring Taraji P. Henson and Sam Rockwell. And STX, again, another one of these small studios that puts out a film, a small amount of theaters because they don't have the clout that someone like a Universal or Paramount or Warner Brothers does to just throw something out there on 3,000 screens. Plus, I think for these small studios, I think that they do much better targeted demographics in knowing where to put out what 1,700 screens, where in the country do we put our film out? And I think that, they do a lot more market research in that regard as opposed to the bigger studios that just blanket cover the country.
Mm-hmm.
But what are your thoughts either on, on The Best of Enemies, if you're familiar with it, or just kind of STX or these smaller studios just trying to make their own way here at the box office?
So to address the smaller studios, yeah, I think they're very smart in how they roll out their movies. It kind of goes back to how the studios used to roll out movies back in like the 70s and even beginning of 80s, where it would only be on a couple key markets, couple hundred screens, and then you would let it build and roll it out from there. So we're seeing that obviously instead of a few hundred, now you're seeing, maybe 1,500, in this case, 1,700, and then they're going to let it build. They're going to build a campaign around it and hopefully kind of let the word of mouth take it. So I think they're approaching it in a very smart way, and I hope there's more that crop up and take that approach. You can't compete with the big boys that just, like you said, blast it out there. It's just costs too much. But if it's a good film and you have a smart rollout, it'll work. Now, as far as the film, I love both actors. I think they're both amazing. Well, this is another one that's a true story. So, and it's actually quite interesting. So, I mean, it is dealing with racism as a subject matter, so it's always tough. I have a feeling it's going to do pretty good with that cast, and I think it's going to be a good picture. I'm looking forward to seeing this one.
Looking at the grades, currently sitting at a 52% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics, but has an A on CinemaScore, which is from the audience exit polls. So people going to see the movie, much like yourself and I were talking about, they seem to like it. The only kind of detractors I've read in reviews about it is, oh, here's another film that takes a safe approach to race relations, which was kind of some of the critiques that came out about Green Book, which ended up winning Best Picture at the Academy Awards.
Right.
I've even kind of taken that stance with Green Book, is that I saw the film and I felt, yes, it deals with race relations and how it was in the 60s in the South for an African-American man to an extent. And yes, he's made to feel uncomfortable and some things happen, but there's just things that make you a little bit uncomfortable and feel uncomfortable for Mahershala Ali and Green Book. And so some of the critiques I've read about The Best of Enemies is it's like that. It takes just a safe enough approach to dealing with race relations, just enough to make us realize, well, maybe we haven't come as far as we think we have in the way we treat one another.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what any good movie does, is it gets you to just re-examine, it gets you to think. And that's really what you need. I don't know if you necessarily need it to be like to be brutal and in your face to get that point across.
In this case, you don't want to say show, don't tell. You want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
You could be subtle in your storytelling and still get across great amounts of information.
Mm-hmm.
If you have to put it out there in people's faces, it feels like to me that you're kind of taking the audience to be dumb. You never want to assume your audience is dumb and have to lay it all out for them. They're smart enough to put two and two together a lot of times, I think.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
So for The Best of Enemies, I don't think that this will be as successful as STX's earlier release this year, which was The Upside, which went on to gross over $100 million. But I think this provides a great vehicle for Taraji P. Henson, who's branching out to different genres and different types of roles after she's been running on Empire for so long. And I mean, Sam Rockwell is great in most things that he does.
Yeah.
So it's great to see these two together. Looking at the prognosis at the box office, it's got a good per screen average. I don't think it'll expand much in theater count from here because it wasn't lighting the world on fire on a per screen average basis. I think it'll hold tight at 1,700 screens, at least for next week. And I think seeing what the follow-up week's take is will determine kind of where it goes from there with exhibitors. But again, just it's great to see these films, these more smaller, intimate films told on with smaller budgets out there in the box office. It's good counter programming to the mass appeal of something like pretty much everything that we're going to talk about in our top 5.
Yeah.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.
So now we've reached the point in our show where we take an aside and get to know our guest a little bit better. This week we have, as I mentioned, director and producer Dan Ventresca with us. So Dan, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself and what you do and how you got to where you're at now?
Sure. I've been making short films for, I don't know, probably since around 2000, 2001. Kind of found my way to produce a couple of music videos when I was in the Bay Area, kind of rap videos for MTV. And then I ended up moving down to LA and kind of got into Hollywood proper. Struggled for a while just writing a lot of awful, bad screenplays, really bad. And then I finally got some internships. One was at Warner Brothers, just kind of worked insane hours and finally got a break. I was hired as an assistant to some literary agents, and they ended up getting bought out by one of the big 5 talent agencies. And so I worked there for quite a while, which was really great. Just an amazing time in my life of just so many hours, but it didn't really feel like work. You know, it was fun. It was a bunch of us just trying to make movies, trying to make stuff happen. So it was really great. I ended up leaving eventually because I really wanted to get back to directing. That was really my first passion. So I came back to New York and started writing. Well, actually, that's how we met. My first short films being back, which was a black and white kind of Twilight Zone-esque short. And that was something that I produced and directed. From there, you and I worked a lot closer, you as my cinematographer, on a short film called The Rival, which, funny enough, was actually based on one of the original writers from the Twilight Zone, one of his short stories that I ended up licensing. But I was really proud of that film, still am. I think everybody really did a great job on that project. After that, I ended up doing a play. I switched gears completely and just kind of wanted to go low tech, and I just wanted to kind of work with actors for a little while. So Carol Max at Curtain Call Theater, who's awesome. She's been doing it forever. She's a maverick in theater. She gave me a shot, and I did a Neil Simon play, which an ensemble, which was really a great experience. It was well received, and the cast was just great. I was really proud of them. They really, it was a tough one. There was 9 different locations. There was a lot of coordination, a lot of wardrobe changing. It was like a 2.5-hour play, so it was not easy. They were all rock stars, and now I'm just finishing a feature. Just finished actually writing today. We're just kind of getting started on this one, so hopefully we'll start shooting in September. And this one's an original though, so this one took a little longer to write.
Looking at kind of the journey to this point, you mentioned working under a literary agent. So what exactly does a literary agent do with regards to the film industry?
They have to know everyone, essentially. They have to know producers, they have to know everybody at the studios, they have to know what's going on. I've never met any people that worked as hard as agents. The good ones anyway. They're making phone calls every day, all day. Typical hours, or standard hours I should say, is 9 to 7. Most of them are up at 5 anyway doing work already. And then on weekends, they're reading scripts. So really their job is to help guide the client, but more importantly, it's to get them in rooms with people that are making films or TV shows. They're just a hive of activity. All talent agencies are buzzing with activity. It's the hub of all the information coming in and out of Hollywood.
This past 12-month period, you've directed for the screen and you've taken a turn to direct for the stage. What main differences have you picked up on in your style as a director that differs between the screen and stage?
That's a good question. I think it's kind of similar, actually, in a way, because I didn't really realize I was doing it at the time until I actually did the play, because I like to rehearse a lot with actors. I feel like letting them kind of take their time and find the character through various improvisations and just reading the scenes, trying different things. You start to layer you start to build one thing on top of the other. So you're already kind of getting closer every time you do it to the character. And I tried to do that as much as I could on the film side of things prior to actually shooting. The main difference I would say is that when we're rolling on set, I can do improvisations to get a reaction that we can then record.
Mm.
Whereas in the theater, that all has to be done ahead of time.
It's a oneer.
Yeah.
It's a one take deal, basically.
Correct. So in that regard, my pre-production rehearsals does not really change. The only real difference is I'm already then coming up with ideas on how to extract something natural when the camera's rolling if we're not getting there on the first or second take. That's the only real difference. I mean, aside from naturally with camera, that now you're adding a whole other element of staging and blocking with the camera.
Right, because on stage you're playing to the audience.
Mhm.
That's at that fourth wall.
Mhm.
On screen, of course, you can help visually tell the story by changing your camera angle or making it a close up or wide, or there's a lot different visual language to on screen versus on stage. But now that you've experienced both, is there one that you perhaps prefer to the other? Or do you feel more inclined to direct for the screen or for the stage?
But I probably would have to say, I think film for me is still a little bit more expressive as an artist. And I hate to throw around the artist word, but I feel like it's a little, let me put it this way, and it's cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. You know, film, it's really a director's medium. Theater is an actor's medium. Television is a writer producer medium. So in that regard, I feel a little bit more satisfied again as an artist, as a director in film. I can say something more personal through film than I can say if I'm directing a play. But directing a play is also extremely expressive and fun. It's just in a different way.
Who are some of your favorite directors that you kind of draw inspiration from?
Well, that's good. That's a good question. I pull kind of from everywhere, but I would say probably, Francis Ford Coppola, my all-time favorite. I try to, especially when I'm kind of ramping up on a project, sometimes I'll do research depending on the type of project. For the feature that I'm working on now, it's been a lot of European filmmakers, French New Wave, some Italian Neorealism. I love all those guys, Godard, Truffaut, Michelangelo Antonioni.
Mm-hmm.
Some Fellini stuff I like. Not all, but some. Bergman. But I also like a lot of the eclectic, maybe not so well known kind of names like Mike Lee, for example. He's kind of inspired some of my directing approach as far as rehearsals and kind of like a naturalism he kind of adopts. So I kind of pull from everybody, the great Sidney Lumet, William Friedkin. It's kind of all over the board, really. I tend to like the directors that are a little more, I don't want to say auteurs, but they're artists themselves. Whereas let's say a lot of these kind of mainstream movies now, you can't tell one from the other. I mean, it might as well be directed by a committee, and most of the time they are. I kind of like where I can sense the individual coming across a little bit more. Who I've really just been kind of watching a lot is Joe Wright. Just done some great work. He just did The Darkest Hour with Gary Oldman, did Atonement, which was a great film. I thought that was just a sweeping, epic film. Hannah, it's kind of a thriller, Pride and Prejudice. He's worked a lot with Keira Knightley, but his stuff is just so good. It's just so rich and textured. I'm a big fan of his.
Because I look at people like Jim Jarmusch,
Uh-huh.
Wes Anderson,
Yeah.
Alex Proyas,
Oh, yeah.
or Darren Aronofsky, Danny Boyle.
Mm-hmm.
I like seeing directors like that who have a fingerprint. They leave their fingerprint on any film that they put out.
Definitely. And I've been intentionally trying to watch as many different foreign films as I possibly can because there's so many good movies out there that are not American films that they're really doing something different. It's kind of like when the French New Wave first popped up here in America, it was so different. That is what's happening elsewhere. So I really try to go out of my way to watch movies. Most people don't know, at least here in America. They're like, wait, what is that? So I find I'm putting them onto it, and it does take a little time to do the research. But I'm just so sick of the same old kind of regurgitated crap.
What is on the horizon for you in 2019?
Currently, it's just the feature. As you know, I like a lot of prep time, and I've only got a couple of months to get this going, which frightens me. So I don't think I can focus on anything else. So I'm really just putting everything into getting this film shot and take my time with editing. So that's really it. I'm really I just want to get this one pretty much done and out of the system. It's one of those things that just kind of I had to do it. It kind of based on a personal experience, and so it was kind of a purging process to just vanquish it and be done. So yeah, I'm just really excited to start shooting again.
Are you at liberty to tell the listeners a little bit about what the film's about or the title?
Yeah, right now the title's called The Taste of You, and it's kind of like it's kind of hard to describe, but the only way I can really describe it so you get somewhat of an idea is it's kind of like if Fatal Attraction was more of a psychological horror film and more of a character study. And we're going to shoot it in black and white, kind of like in a documentary kind of style, kind of very natural, some heightened reality with the look of it. It's probably the best way I can describe it.
Dan, if somebody wants to get in touch with you on social media or check out some of your work, where could they go? How can they connect with you?
Well, you can always drop me an email. I've got some Vimeo links. Facebook is one, or you can email me ventresca.dan@gmail, and that's VENTRESCA.dan@gmail.com. Yeah, I always welcome, meet new people and hopefully collaborators and the best way. Now, I'm not one of those that's on like Twitter and I don't have Instagram, so I feel like I would not get any work done whatsoever. So I try to limit my social media footprint as much as I can, which may or may not be the best approach to a career, but whatever.
All right. Well, Dan, I want to thank you for taking the time to tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, thank you.
Probably get back into the countdown so we can get some more of your insights on the films in the top five, which there's plenty to say about all of them. And we still have our opinion segment on the way that we'll get into as well. But for now, I appreciate you taking the time to tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you for asking. Appreciate it.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 5.
We'll get back into the countdown now. We're up to number 5. Down from number 3 this week is Captain Marvel from Buena Vista and Disney, taking in $12.6 million, a 38.6% drop from last week. The film lost 412 screens to bring its count down to 3,573. Still a lot of screens to be on, as it averaged just over $3,500 per screen, and it brings its cume up to $374.1 million in its 5th week of release domestically, and as we reported last week, it has crossed the $1 billion mark worldwide. Now we've left the small studio films behind in the bottom half of the top 10, and now we're into the directing by committee section of the countdown. I think with the exception of Us, which we'll talk about in a minute. Here in Captain Marvel, we know that this is the story that tells the origin of kind of the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe. What are your thoughts on Captain Marvel, or this comic book movie genre that seemingly is unstoppable? It's just a juggernaut at this point.
Well, so first I'll start with Captain Marvel. I'm a huge fan of Brie Larson, so I'm excited to see another great actress kind of get a shot at a big movie. The most successful comic book movies, in my opinion, have some of the best skilled, trained, serious actors. I mean, Christian Bale for The Dark Knight, unbelievable. Brie Larson, Captain Marvel, she's awesome. I have superhero movie fatigue, and I've had it for a while. And I get it; it does big business. A lot of people go see it, but I just can't. I can't watch another one, to be honest with you.
We've had our attention commanded now for over 10 years building the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Endgame is supposed to, tie it all up, supposed to, wrap it up for this first era. And I think that's going to probably do it for me. I'm with you. Like, I can't keep watching them.
Wow.
There's so many of them, and there's so many of them that come out per year. And I will say this, I'm happy for Captain Marvel, and I'm happy for Brie Larson and for Marvel to put a female-led superhero film front and center.
Yeah.
And while she won't play, I'm assuming, a pivotal role in Endgame, just her contribution to the Avengers and taking more of a role on moving into the next era of the universe, because I'm sure a lot of our favorites of the Avengers are probably going to wrap up their story threads in Endgame as well.
Yeah.
It's good to have something like that. I mean, we had Wonder Woman a little over 2 years ago come out, and that made a statement to the kind of comic book hero genre of films.
Right.
So here's a fun question. If the two universes clashed and you had to put Gal Gadot up against Brie Larson as Wonder Woman versus Captain Marvel, who do you think comes out on top?
Now, are we talking character or are we talking actor? What are we talking here?
I'm not looking at historically how the characters have been in comic books.
Okay.
They're cinematic portrayals. You have Wonder Woman going against Captain Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
Who wins out?
Well, I say Wonder Woman, Gal Gadot. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a hard one. I'm gonna go with Gal. My final answer.
We ask the hard questions here on the Weekend Take. Before Captain Marvel, as I've talked about for the last few weeks, I mean, it's at $374 million domestically, over $1 billion worldwide. To think 10 years ago, there was maybe, I think, 4 films that had crossed $1 billion worldwide. And now here we are in 2019, and there's 38 films that have crossed $1 billion.
That right there represents the state of affairs that the industry is in my opinion. Well, put it this way, that right there is why I seek out independent foreign films. Don't want to see the same old crap.
It's all important material going into the opinion segment as well, because I think it does speak volumes to the state of affairs in the industry right now, and in the studios and at the multiplex. So, but I mean, for Captain Marvel, I mean, it's still got plenty of gas left in the tank. It's only at number 5.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
You know, it'll be hanging around the top 10 for a little while. And Brie Larson, despite the detractors that she's had on social media in the last few weeks, in the time leading up to the release and since then, she just kind of rises above all of them, and they're just going to have to kind of get used to it. Brie Larson is signed on for, I think, 6 to 8 Marvel films going into the second era of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So, and I'm sure as it progresses, she takes more of a prominent role. So,
yeah,
the angry keyboard warriors in their basements,
right,
will just have to deal.
Yeah, they're going to have to handle it.
Number 4.
So moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 4. Down from number 2 this week is Us from Universal, which took in $13.8 million, a 58.4% drop from last week. The film only lost 231 screens to bring its count down to 3,512, still averaging just under $4,000 per screen though, as it brings its cume up to $152.4 million in its third week of release on a $20 million budget. Dan, with Us, you know, here we have Jordan Peele, who rose to pretty good prominence after Get Out, when people saw him for the storyteller that he is and not just the funny guy from Key and Peele. Right. Here he is offering us, you know, something new in Us, but also something equally as terrifying potentially. It's really taken off. You know, it had a $72 million opening weekend, which was well above industry expectations at the time. $20 million budget. It's already at almost $153 million domestically. It's got another 64 foreign, so $216 million worldwide. There's certainly no stopping it, and I think this gives a lot of liberty to Jordan Peele.
Absolutely. He's another exciting new filmmaker that I love. This is good. This is good for the business. It's good for the industry. It's good for the audience, because it's so very difficult to make interesting, different movies that tend to push the envelope, but you can also tell that it's his movie, and he's doing it within the current studio system, which is very, very, very difficult and very, very rare nowadays. Whereas back in the day, you had a lot of them. You had kind of the American golden era, you know, if you will, you know, the Spielbergs, the Coppolas, the Scorseses. There's a lot of them, you know, Spike Lee and all those guys. Now you're not really seeing that, but he's managing to do it, and I'm happy he is, because I just love all his stuff. It's really good.
You know, earlier when we were talking about you in the guest segment, and we were talking about The Rival, which was based on a story from Charles Beaumont, who was one of the original writers on The Twilight Zone.
Right.
Tying it back now to Jordan Peele, who has taken the very risky approach to trying to revitalize The Twilight Zone. Is Jordan Peele the right person to bring this back? And have you checked out any of the new show?
You know, I'm excited to see it. I think if anyone's going to tackle The Twilight Zone today, he's probably the best choice, in my opinion.
Are you going to check out Us, or have you already checked it out?
Yeah, it's crazy. You saw it, right, or no?
I meant to see it this past weekend, but
you're going to like it. I'll just say that. I can't really say anything about it, but I actually liked it more than Get Out.
Okay, well, that's high compliment.
Yeah, not all is what it seems. I'll just say that.
Okay.
It's one of those movies too where it goes going back to what we were talking about, where just like any good horror film, there's kind of an underlying deeper kind of line to it that kind of makes you think. So I think he achieved both. So I'll just leave it there. You'll know what I mean when you see it, but it brings up some interesting questions.
Which is great, because I mean, yes, as much as I love to be scared at a horror film, having that underlying story or underlying message to be told, it adds just another layer to the enjoyment of a film.
Definitely.
Because it's one thing to scare somebody, which a lot of these horror films do. They scare people by having things jump out at them. It's something entirely different to have someone sit in the theater and really think about what's happening on the screen in front of them and be taking in a lot of information that's not just, oh no, this thing is coming to kill me, or this thing is jumping out at me. That's good storytelling in any genre.
Right.
We're looking ahead with Us now. Here it is, its third weekend release. I think it stands a very good chance to surpass the box office take of Get Out. I mean, Get Out did very well for itself in the sense that it was a very slow burn. It didn't open big, whereas Us opened very big. We'll see where Us goes from here. I think it'll surpass the $176 million that Get Out made. And now we just have to see what Jordan Peele makes after this on the big screen. But in the meantime, we can see plenty of his stories on the small screen on the new Twilight Zone.
Yeah, right.
Number 3.
So moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 3. Down from number 1 this week is our defending box office champ, Dumbo, from Buena Vista and Disney, taking in $18.2 million, a 60% drop from last week. Its theater count didn't change, stayed steady at 4,259 screens, had a per-screen average of just under $4,300, and it brings its cume up to $76.2 million in its second week of release on a $170 million budget. So Dan, looking at Dumbo, we talked a little bit about this before the show. Buena Vista and Disney, it just seems weird that you take Dumbo, which is one of the most beloved Disney animated films, you pair it with Tim Burton, whose previous live action adaptations have done well. Alice in Wonderland did well. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory did well. And here Dumbo is kind of sitting at the bottom of the barrel for Disney's live action reimaginings. I mean, in these 10 films that Disney's done of live action reimaginings, Dumbo's sitting at the bottom. And I don't really know what signal or what message this sends to Disney in looking ahead at some of their upcoming live action reimaginings. Obviously, everyone knows about Aladdin coming out Memorial Day weekend. Everyone knows about, Lion King coming out this year and Mulan coming out next year. Where do you think it went wrong for Dumbo, Dan? Like, for it to just open below expectation, a 60% drop this week. What's missing the mark for Dumbo?
I don't even know why. I guess I'm just like, why they even decided on Dumbo. I think it came down to the very basics of selection. Like, I just don't think it was the right film to even make. When you're looking at Disney as a whole and what they own, Dumbo would not be on the top of my list.
An $170 million budget, though.
It's insane. Absolutely insane.
Huge budget, right? And, after 10 days in release now, worldwide, it's got 213 million. So it's getting a bit of saving from the foreign market. But this is the biggest it's going to get. I mean, it already had its opening weekend. That was going to be the biggest weekend it had. And I'm looking at it now, and yes, it's opened in all the markets in foreign gross. And if you go by Hollywood math of, say, 2.5 times your budget is like the break-even, quote unquote, that means that you're looking at $425 million worldwide to break even, and it's at 213. It's not going to do that. It's going to lose money. Which do you think it hurts more? Does it hurt Tim Burton's brand as a director, or will it hurt Disney's brand on these upcoming live action releases?
I don't think it's going to hurt either one, actually, to be quite honest. They'll give Tim Burton another movie, there's no question. Disney will just write that one off. Now, I'll say this, if that was let's say that was a first time director, well, what they tend to do is if you make a small indie movie that was a huge hit, they'll then give you a monster film like this. So if you were, let's say this was your first big studio movie as a director, now you're in director jail and you probably won't get another studio movie, I'll say. But if it's somebody like Tim Burton, it's probably not going to affect them too bad.
If you make the decision and you're looking at the library of Disney animated films and you have to make a live action reimagining of one of them, what's your pick?
Hands down, Sword in the Stone.
Okay.
Or The Last Unicorn could be pretty dope. The Black Cauldron. I mean, there's just some sick animated Disney films that could be amazing live action.
So for Dumbo, looking at its prognosis at the box office, I think Dumbo kind of continues down its slippery slope next week. I think it'll end its run above the $100 million mark domestically. I think it's a stretch, but I think it'll get there. But that's not something to celebrate. I mean, when looking at the live action reimaginings that have come out so far, I mean, some of them, their opening weekends are going to be more than Dumbo makes its entire run. The Jungle Book in 2016 opened to $103 million. Alice in Wonderland in 2010 opened to $116 million. Beauty and the Beast opened to $174 million. So I don't think Dumbo will necessarily be to the Disney live action reimaginings what Solo, a Star Wars story, was to the Star Wars spinoffs. I don't think it'll make them dead in the water, but I think Disney is only going to go for heavy hitters from here forward, starting with Aladdin and Lion King and Mulan.
Right.
And anything that they try to do beyond that, it better be deeply rooted in their fan base for them to attempt this again.
I agree. Those are big films coming up. So, and it's not like they're not smart. I'm sure that they will adjust accordingly.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take. And for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 2.
All right, well, moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 2. It's our second new release of the week. It is Pet Sematary from Paramount, which made $25 million its opening weekend on 3,585 screens. A per screen average of just under $7,000 per screen. And as I mentioned, here it is at $25 million, its opening frame, on a $21 million budget. I'll be very blunt about this. This is the film that no one asked for, in my opinion, but apparently someone asked for it and wanted to see it because we're talking about it being at number 2. But I think it's part of the larger problem that we'll get to in a moment. Pet Sematary, the original, was definitely one of the formative horror films for me growing up that just scared the crap out of me. I see it more of as a disservice to make this remake. Just like I felt strongly that remaking it was not a good idea. I don't really get it. Like, I can understand in them making that Castle Rock series, which kind of ties Stephen King's novel universe all together, because Stephen King himself was tying these universes together in his books.
Right.
But I didn't need a Pet Sematary remake. I don't know why. Like, I didn't need it, but I mean, maybe I'm off base. I mean, what do you think, Dan?
I'm with you there. I grew up on both of those, and they were always on, and they were just great films, and very much of the time, of the era. Now, I will say this, just like the It remake, I'll watch it, and I think that's part of the problem is because you have people like me that say, oh my God, I can't believe they're redoing it. Well, I'll see it just because I kind of need to see it. I want to see what they do. But it's weird. It's like one of those things where you watch it and you kind of enjoy it, and it's okay, but it kind of doesn't leave you fully satisfied. Whereas, say, the original did. And maybe that's because we grew up with them. I tend to think they were just better films.
When you've got something in the market like Us from Jordan Peele, we don't need Pet Sematary. I feel like Us and Pet Sematary are at two different ends of the spectrum.
Yes.
We talked about with Us, here's Jordan Peele, who's kind of becoming his own creative force and storyteller, telling us this story that is terrifying and gets us on the edge of our seat, and it's something that we haven't seen before. So then let's counter program it next week by putting out Pet Sematary and remake one of these Stephen King stories. I don't get it, but I'm clearly not part of the solution, because $25 million opening weekend on a $21 million budget clearly states that there's interest in it. Even if it's morbid curiosity,
right,
that there's interest in it.
Oh, and they know that. And again, when we get into the opinion section, I may be able to shed some light. I don't know where it's going, though, from here.
Here we are. We're in 2019. We had It Chapter 1 come out a year ago. Pet Sematary now. It Chapter 2, I believe, comes out this September or October. You have a successful run of the Castle Rock series on streaming. Oh, and a feature film adaptation of Dr. Sleep coming out as well.
Oh, right.
I mean, I don't know if that was something that we needed. Maybe it'll be good. But not all of them work out well, because I believe it was last year, the year before, Dark Tower came out.
Oh, yeah.
And that bombed.
Yep.
Poor Matthew McConaughey. Why does he keep attaching himself to these films that just go nowhere? And I felt, because Idris Elba was in that too, and it just didn't work out for anybody. And that's kind of what I was hoping was going to be the case with Pet Sematary, but it wasn't. I don't know. I mean, if I'm itching to see a horror film and I go up to the box office window and I look up at the show times, and Pet Sematary and Us are playing at the same exact time, I'm buying a ticket to Us. I can't see patronizing this remake, because it sets a precedent for more of them, and I don't want more of them.
Well, let's just say it wasn't Pet Sematary. Let's say it was It. I would still go see Us. I personally would rather see something that I don't know anything about than something that I've already seen 8,000 times. It's something, you know what I mean? Like, I'd much rather see an original film than a remake.
Looking ahead for Pet Sematary, where it goes from here, I mean, and this is kind of where it boggles my mind that it opened to $25 million, because you look at the grades, and on Rotten Tomatoes, a critic score of 61%, so not the most favorable score to have. But you look at Cinema Score, moviegoers coming out of the theater, they gave it a C+. Clearly, they're not thrilled with it, and one has to wonder, okay, did they not like it because they went in to compare it to the original, like you and I were just talking about, that kind of morbid curiosity, and they were let down by it because they're fans of the original and they should have just watched the original at home, and that's why they graded it poorly? Or is it just really bad? I guess it's a question that can only be answered by watching it,
right?
But I'm not doing it at the box office. I'll wait till it's on Netflix. I'll wait till it's someplace where I don't have to physically hand money directly to the film. So that segues into our opinion segment, which Pet Sematary makes a good segue for it. What I want to kind of talk about and get your opinion on, Dan, and hear your insight on is, We're looking at the box office and just looking at the microcosm of this week's box office, okay? Of the films in the box office, so starting at number 10 and working our way up, we had How to Train Your Dragon, which is part of a franchise. Wonder Park, which tries to stand on its own and is not doing well. Unplanned, based on a true story. 5 Feet Apart, adaptation of a young adult novel. Best of Enemies, based on a true story. Captain Marvel, one more cog in the comic book superhero movie machine. Us, which really kind of stands as the only original film out right now. Dumbo, live action reimagining. Pet Sematary, remake. Shazam, part of DC's attempt to be relevant in the comic book movie making universe. You're looking at these, and even on a broader scale, look at a bigger window. You look at 2018's yearly box office and how that shaped up, and even looking at 2019 up to this point. Everything in the top 10 of 2018 is part of a universe, a sequel, or a remake. Black Panther, Avengers Infinity War, Incredibles 2, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, Aquaman, Deadpool 2, Dr. Seuss's The Grinch, Mission Impossible Fallout, which I think is like the 6th film, and Ant-Man and the Wasp. And then Bohemian Rhapsody, which is a biopic. I think the closest thing we get is A Quiet Place at number 16 for 2018, which was just a big surprise to everyone. No one expected it to do that. And even looking at 2019, again, same thing. You got Captain Marvel, How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World, Us, which stands as like an actual original tale, Glass, which is part of M. Night Shyamalan's new little universe that he's created and just informed us about, The Upside, which is a remake of a French film, Lego Movie 2, Alita Battle Angel, based on a manga, Dumbo, Tyler Perry's Medea Family Funeral, one of 9 Medea films. Escape Room, which is a genre horror film, so that kind of stands out a little bit from the pack. Going down the line, it's remakes, it's universes, it's book adaptations. How have we gotten so far off course as moviegoers and as people who consume media in a way as a moviegoer to think that it's perfectly okay to keep giving our box office dollars to this unoriginal thought process?
Well, that is a very good question. I kind of got into Hollywood proper 2007. So really what happened is the thing that started it pretty much all was technology, the dying off of the DVD market. The home video market actually is what sustained the studios mostly because they had VHS, and then they got when they had the new technology, and then guess what? Everybody's got to rebuy all their movies on DVD and Blu-ray now. It's just like the record business. It was CDs. So it was technology that disrupted the industry on a whole. It was really a perfect storm. The writer's strike happened, the DVD markets dropped out, and studios had time to think. They were like, well, wait a second here. If we don't have writers, what do we have? Well, we have all these properties that we own. So do we need original material? Do we not need original material? And the other thing was that domestic used to be 80%, international used to be 20. That also shifted. So you had the international business go up to 80% of our total take and 20% now domestic. So that switched. It was really a matter of survival, I think. It's like, okay, do we stay in business or do we basically die out? And then you had a couple of big movies that made gazillions of dollars, and they were like, wait a second. So they stopped trying to get doubles and singles and went for the home run. 1 or 2 home runs would basically save the studio. So they were taking higher and higher bets. They were trying to hit as many targets as they could. They have to hit the 4 quadrants because it has to play in China, it has to play in Europe, and it's got to play here. So I guess in one way I can see kind of what led to that, and I can see why they decided to, I guess, approach it a certain way. But I feel like, they still should probably try to even out more with a couple of more doubles and singles to offset the home run swings that they're going for. They're trying to be like Babe Ruth. Boom, home run.
To kind of go off that baseball analogy, if all you're doing is swinging for the fences, you stand just as much risk to strike out,
Yeah,
which is what's happening.
right. No question.
And I can see that being the case then. But I mean, enough time has passed. The writers have been back to work for a while. So why are we still doing it?
That's a good question. I think it's one of those things where it's just we're too far along to try to reverse course. Here's the other thing. I think it's nothing against executives. I have a lot of friends that are studio executives, and they're some of the smartest people I've ever met. But when your job is on the line for taking a risk creatively, it's so much easier to say no than it is to say yes. And when you say yes, there's a lot baggage that comes with that yes.
It's those same number crunchers we were talking about earlier that sit there and they look at a property and they're like, okay, we're going to put input A in, we can expect output B. It kind of baffles me and kind of angers me at the same time because there are original titles coming out that just aren't, they're not getting their day in court, basically. They're here, they're gone. Meanwhile, especially in hosting this show, Captain Marvel's in its 5th week of release. I've been talking about Captain Marvel for 5 weeks now. I'm going to talk about Captain Marvel for at least 3 more weeks.
Right.
And you said we're too far along. We can't reverse course at this point. But if we were going to reverse course, are we going to reverse course by changing moviegoers' viewing behavior, or do we have to change it at the studio first?
Well, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think it's a good question. I think part of it is it's the era that we live in now. Even let's just say back in 2000, you didn't have Instagram, you didn't have Twitter, and all these other things taking away your attention from kind of traditional methods of entertainment. Right. So I was born in 1980, so I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So in the 90s, even then, going out to see a film, you kind of did it every weekend. Same thing with television. You would sit down and wait for that show, and everybody would talk about it, and the numbers were huge. That's just not the case anymore because there's just way too many things that's pulling people's attentions away from these things.
And that aside, I mean, okay, fine. So the whole remake culture and adaptation culture, more recently, just within the last few years, is this need for a universe, a never-ending, sprawling out storyline that spreads across multiple films and multiple platforms, like Marvel's tying in story elements to their movies, to their TV shows. So if you're not watching the TV show, you're not going to get this piece of information for the movie. And now other properties are trying to emulate that. And it's become such a buzzword to make everything a universe and be tied together. And it's just like, I get the reasoning behind it. Because if you can get your audience and the people consuming your media to feel the need to watch every piece of your media, but again, it goes back to the why. Like, have we really gotten that lazy that we need to have everything in this universe? Nothing can stand alone. Can't have original ideas. Got to make remakes and sequels and prequels and spin-offs, reimaginings and adaptations. Like, there's so many buzzwords around everything that's wrong right now, and not enough focus being put on original content.
Yeah, I think part of it probably is that they're trying to, very much like television, if it's a hit, you're hooked, right? Game of Thrones, hooked. I can't wait till next Sunday. And not only that, but I think television allows you to really settle in with the characters, and really you have time to get into a lot of detail and nuances and real backstory. So I think one reason why the films do that is that reason specifically, because you're also going to get repeat viewers. You're going to have a built-in audience that's going to keep coming back to see the duration of this storyline. So I think they're very smart in the way that they're doing that. I just think sometimes now it's just gratuitous.
We touched on this earlier, was when we were talking about Captain Marvel, because Captain Marvel just crossed the $1 billion mark, right? It's the 38th film, I believe, to do that all time, right? You go back 10 years ago, there was maybe between 4 and 6 films that had crossed the 1 billion mark. And so this kind of harkens back to a very kind of key conversation that was had years ago with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, who predicted that the studio system's going to collapse with the theater exhibitors along with it, because what's going to end up happening is they will only release your blockbuster tentpole films in theaters, and audiences will have to find other ways to watch counter programming in smaller films, because it's going to become so expensive to be a theatrical release. Like, you're going to have a home run to be theatrical. I think they're certainly onto something. It's funny that the two of the guys who created what a blockbuster is are the two guys also predicting blockbusters being the downfall of the studio system and theatrical exhibitors. I think the reason why there's so many films now that cross that $1 billion mark is because these are those tentpole films, and then everything else is just kind of successful or kind of seen underneath it.
Yeah, but here's the funny thing though, is even their tentpole movies, meaning Lucas and Spielberg, were still better for the most part and original than the tentpoles of now.
True. I mean, because these guys were visionaries in the medium of film,
right?
To create the things that they did. And now a lot of the stuff now is like kind of directed by committee. And I couldn't tell you who directed Captain Marvel.
No, okay.
And they don't even list the director on Box Office Mojo for Pet Sematary, because why? Like, what could they have possibly brought from a vision standpoint? At some point, everything has a tipping point. What is that tipping point going to be?
I think it's going to happen and we won't even know it. And I think we're already kind of underway. I think it's going to be it's going to be Netflix, it's going to be Amazon, Hulu. Do not think it's going to be the traditional studios that we've known.
Because we have all this technology at our fingertips and the instant gratification that, some people today that aren't like you and I that want to go see things in a theater can't stand to be in a dark room without looking at their phone for 2 hours.
That's a good point, and that also I think is contributing to the state of affairs. Because I've been to countless films, and I almost lost it because there's people would talk in the theater, people would be on their phones in the theater, and so the ushers don't do anything. I think it's a perfect storm that's kind of contributing. So I think all these things are really. So I have to admit, I usually have a horrible experience with this when I go to see a movie. So I might as well just watch it at home when I don't have these annoying, disrespectful people that think it's okay to talk or play on their phone while you're going to see a film.
I mean, in talking about technology being more readily available, you used to want to go to a theater because that was the way to experience, like when Jurassic Park came out, and
Yeah,
that was like the first real surround sound movie, and it was just
right.
amazing to be in a theater and hear dinosaurs stomping behind you.
Yeah,
Well, I could go buy a surround sound home theater sound system for a few $100 now and get a big screen 4K TV for, again, a few $100 now,
right.
and have my own home theater experience.
True.
So I think technology hurts the theater going experience in that way as well.
No, I agree. I think theaters are going to be more like the Alamo Draft House. That I think will be the theater of the future.
Hopefully, the future movie going experience has a future. Which falls first? Do exhibitors fall or does the studio system fall? It'll be interesting to see. But either way, they're unknowingly plotting their own demise by continually putting out all these remakes and sequels and prequels and spin-offs and universe inclusive films because I've reached my fill, and I know a lot of other people have too.
Yeah, like I said, that's why I seek out independent film from other countries. I mean, and American, but I do not interested in these studio fare any longer. I can't really watch it.
Well, and that's just it. It definitely seems to be a product of American filmmaking because I don't see any behaviors like this in foreign films.
No,
I don't see all these remakes. I don't see all these. The only time I ever hear of a remake is an American studio remade an American film or they remade a foreign film. I don't read about or see foreign films needing to have universes and spin-offs and sequels. Like they're out to make cinema.
right,
And I think American studios are out to make money.
correct.
That's the line in the sand.
There's no reason we can't make amazing blockbusters. Look at James Cameron. Okay, every movie that guy's made, the quality in which his blockbusters are made far eclipse anything that's being done today.
Yeah, no, I agree. We got one more film to get to on the countdown, Dan, and it's another contributing factor to the problem. But we'll talk about it because that's our job here at the Weekend Take is to report on the weekend box office. But I want to thank you for giving your insight to this topic and this epidemic
Ugh.
that hopefully we find a cure for one day.
I hope.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 1.
All right, so here we are. We're at number 1 in our countdown. It's our third new release of the week. It's Shazam from Warner Brothers, taking in $53.5 million on 4,217 screens, a per-screen average of $12,675, and it has brought its cume up to $56.7 million as it had some early screenings from Fandango about 2 or 3 weeks back, here in its first week of release on a $100 million budget. Here is the next installment in the DC extended universe, which is Warner Brothers and DC's attempt at building something like Marvel's cinematic universe. DC trying to take a little bit more light approach to its films. Earlier this year, we had Aquaman, which felt very much like a Marvel film in its approach. And now we have Shazam, which takes that one step further, bordering on family film levels of comedy and fun and adventure. I think for Shazam, like, yes, it'll be able to stand alone on its own, but although I hear that there's a scene that ties it into DC's extended universe, which is kind of a moot point, because I don't know if you know, but DC's announced that they're kind of putting a hold on the whole idea of an extended universe in their films. Like all the characters they've introduced are kind of going to go on their own ways. They're going to go on their own threads and paths, and maybe down the road we'll tie everyone back together once they've built enough goodwill in all the characters individually to bring them back together. But since it's a DC film, you have to look at it as part of this extended universe. And as part of the extended universe, it's the slowest entrant. Shazam opened to $53.4 million. Of the 7 DC Extended Universe films, that's the smallest opening, being just behind Aquaman, which had a $67.8 million opening. They've changed their approach, but it's not working out, at least in the opening. Now, it worked out for Aquaman ultimately, because Aquaman went on to be the biggest grossing film of the DC Extended Universe worldwide. But I don't know, Shazam to me just feels, it's like if DC remade the movie Big.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, that's exactly.
And they're not even being true to the source material, because in the comic, Billy Batson, when he becomes Shazam, Shazam is his own grown persona. He's not a kid's mentality in a grown man's body. What are your thoughts on Shazam? Is this something that you're going to check out or skip?
I'll probably skip it, to be honest. The only reason why I may watch it is because of the big component, the kind of coming of age, big hybrid, I guess, of the story with a comic book. That's really the only reason why I would even consider it, but I won't seek it out. It'd have to be one of those things where I'm kind of just sitting around with nothing to watch. I'm like, all right, maybe I'll watch it. But other than that, I'd probably not.
For Shazam, I mean, it opened slightly above industry expectations, but those expectations weren't very high. You know, looking at the prognosis for Shazam, it's ultimately going to find itself at the bottom of the barrel of the DC Extended Universe, both from a domestic standpoint and a worldwide standpoint. I mean, just to even get into the next rank, you know, to move from number 7 to number 6, Shazam would somehow have to muster $229 million. And with a $56 million opening weekend, it's not going to do that. To get to number 6 in the worldwide, it would somehow have to get to $658 million. And currently it's at $158 million. So it's not going to do that either. I guess the saving grace for Warner Brothers on this film is this one only cost $100 million to make, whereas other DC Extended Universe films like Aquaman and Justice League are all $250 million films. So they at least stand a better chance to make a profit. And that's about the extent of the silver lining I can give them. I guess the only other thing they can do is they can start building goodwill again with moviegoers to not feel like everything has to be so dark and somber and morose, but that trend isn't going to last much longer either, because the next up on the slate is Joker in October, which has nothing fun about it whatsoever. The biggest problem DC has is finding their identity and who they are as a movie making studio. Marvel knows exactly who they are, and you can see it in every Marvel movie, but DC and Warner Brothers, they're just kind of scattershot everywhere, it feels like.
Yeah, they've never really quite figured that out yet. No, you're right. It's a good attempt. I think they're starting to find their feet on what they are, but obviously only time will tell. I think they need some more time on that front.
Yeah, and so I think it was smart on their behalf to discontinue this idea of their own extended universe and to just let their stories stand alone and maybe down the road tie them all back together. In that regard, they're kind of doing what we were just talking about that we hope studios do and not make a universe out of everything. It's only a half solution. It's only a compromise because there's still comic book movies that are not original works. Let's see where Shazam goes from here. Talking about where we go from here, that pretty much is it for us this week, but we're going to look ahead to next week now, where we have 4 wide releases coming out. We have After from Averon, opening on about 2,000 screens. Of course, we mentioned Hellboy from Lionsgate, which is opening on over 3,200 screens. Little from Universal, opening on over 2,600 screens. That's a family comedy. Again, talking about the whole idea of big. This is big in reverse. I don't know if you're familiar with this title, but basically, overbearing, powerful woman CEO gets jinxed by this young girl pretending to be a witch doctor, and she wakes up the next morning in a 10-year-old's body. So it's big in reverse, which is funny because it's called Little as opposed to Big. And then Missing Link from United Artists, opening on over 3,500 screens, which is the latest from Leica Studios, which did Kubo and The Two Strings, among other stop-motion animation releases that are always really good visual pieces to watch. So Dan, looking at the titles coming out next week, do you see one of these taking the number 1 spot from Shazam, or does the word of mouth for Shazam let it hold on to number 1 for one more week?
I think Shazam will probably hold on for another week.
You don't think Hellboy is gonna try and take that spot?
It'll try. I don't know if it'll take it though, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I mean, well, we talked about before the show, looking at Hellboy. Like, yeah, sure, it's got Mila Jovovich in it and David Harbour, who most people know from Stranger Things. He's just not Ron Perlman. I'm sorry. Like, I enjoyed Ron Perlman's portrayal of the character, and everything I've seen of this Hellboy is just kind of like, okay, maybe not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's gonna be a toss-up. It'll be a close race for 1 and 2, I think, between Shazam and Hellboy. But I guess we'll have to see. So, I mean, that about wraps it up for us this week here on the Weekend Take. So, one more time, Dan, if someone wants to get in touch with you or connect, how could they do that?
Yeah, probably email would be the best. Ventresca.dan@gmail.com. Again, that's VENRESCA.dan@gmail.com.
All right, and I'll be sure to put any pertinent links in the episode description below. The Weekend Take is also on social media. We're on Twitter at Weekend Take. We're on Facebook at www.facebook.com/The Weekend Take. And please check out our Patreon campaign at www.patreon.com/The Weekend Take, where for as little as $1, you can become a patron of The Weekend Take and get early exclusive access to extended cuts of the episodes, in case you want to hear more of the conversation Dan and I had today. But otherwise, that about wraps it up for us this week. Dan, I definitely want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show this week.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. My pleasure.
All right, and that wraps it up for us this week. So until next week, take care, and we'll see you all later. Bye.
You've been listening to The Weekend Take. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and Google Play and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take. And for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.